The year was 1978, and Atari's VCS had shown everybody the way forward into a new and burgeoning entertainment market, video games. While the VCS wasn't the first console out there, it was the first to demonstrate that games could have mass market appeal, and suddenly everybody wanted a piece of the action. Enter Mattel, one of the biggest toy makers of the 70s. The Intellivision, a combination of the words intelligent and television, was test marketed in 1979 and released nationwide in 1980. It was the first serious competition for the Atari, as we all called it, with better graphics and sound, and a bizarre but effective marketing campaign starring noted writer and all-around smart-sounding guy George Plimpton.
I'll try almost anything. So when Mattel Electronics asked me to compare their Intellivision games with Atari, I gave it a try. In my opinion, if you try them both, there's only one conclusion you can come to. Intellivision from Mattel Electronics.
This may very well be the first and only game system marketed specifically to smart people. The Intellivision had tons of great games released for it from 1980 through 1983, both from Mattel as well as the newly created third-party development community that included the likes of Activision and Magic. Some of the system's most innovative and technically impressive games came from these outside developers. In 1982, Mattel released the slimmed-down, more modern-looking Intellivision II to replace the 1970s-era original model. And while the name suggests it was a true sequel, like, say, the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2, in fact it was more like the PlayStation 1 to the PS1 rather than a true upgrade. It allowed Mattel to sell the system at a cheaper price. But in 1983, the video game market crashed, taking down every major console in a purge the likes of which the industry hasn't seen before or since. The Intellivision wasn't spared, and by 1984 remaining stock was being cleared out from store shelves. But the system's story doesn't end there. I won't delve too deeply into the Intellivision's post-crash resurrection, but in 1984, former Mattel Electronics Vice President Terence Valesky bought the rights to the system, its games, and its customer list from Mattel for a paltry $20 million, with the idea being that he could make it all work on a much smaller scale. He even bought the rights to most of the biggest third-party games. Intellivision Inc. was born, later changing its name to INTV Corp., selling new systems and even new games direct to consumers through catalog sales. The strategy worked for a while, and the Intellivision soldiered on into the early 90s as a niche product. Eventually, the original programming team known as the Blue Sky Rangers gained the rights to the system and its games and began releasing compilations for modern systems, along with licensing the system for an entry in the popular all-in-one craze among retro gamers. So while it may have been a victim of the crash of 1983, it's had at least as successful a run in modern times as its vintage competition, and its legacy seems secure. Now, the Intellivision was the first system that I ever personally owned. My dad bought me one for Christmas in 1980, and I've never really looked back. I've been playing games ever since. Even took it seriously enough that at one point I had a couple jobs in the game industry and not just working at GameStop. I've since moved on from those, but I do still play games both on consoles and PCs, and I credit the Intellivision for setting me down that road. I love this system, and that's the reason why it's the first one that I'm featuring in a video here. I had both an Intellivision 1 and later an Intellivision 2 shortly after it was released. These are not my original systems. I guess I lost those original ones in moves or threw them away. This was before retro gaming was really a thing. But when I finally did get into classic video gaming, of course I wanted to pick up both of these systems in the box as I originally had them. And these are both the exact package that I had at the time when they were first released. So let's take a look at both of them. I want to just talk a little bit about the systems themselves, the games, I'll show you a little bit of gameplay, and then I'll sort of wrap things up by telling you whether or not it's worth it for you to buy your own. I think you probably know the answer to that already. Or if you want to play on emulation or anything like that, I'll give you some options for that as well. So here we have the Intellivision 1. This was the first model released in originally 1979, and mine was purchased in late 1980. This one here, same package that I originally had, different boxes. You can kind of tell when they were made. This one you see, let's see if that focuses. This one has the original keyboard component still listed on it, and yeah, I believe it's also on the back of the box. Mattel actually got in a lot of trouble over this. They advertised this system as eventually being available with a full computer. This was kind of a big thing at the time. A lot of console manufacturers were trying to do that. Coleco, of course, came out with the Atom later. Mattel had planned to have a full computer keyboard component with the Intellivision. Never actually happened. They got sued for that. They ended up paying a lot of money. That's kind of a digression, a story unto itself. I won't get too far into that, but you can kind of tell from that this is one of the early boxes and the early systems made. This particular box came with Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack. This is it right here. And one of the interesting things about this, and about all early Intellivision games, is just the way that the boxes were made. And you can kind of tell from that also whether a game is early or late or anything like that. Early Mattel boxes had this nice plastic insert, of course gatefold sleeve here, instruction manual, and overlays to go on their kind of crazy controllers here. Disc-based controllers, as you can see, and these are kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing. I got used to this pretty quickly. Of course, they have the number pad. Very few games actually required you to use the numbers, so instead you would slip in these overlays, which offered various different functions. And yeah, it was kind of an innovative system. Even today, you don't see this kind of thing. You can do different functions on the joypad. The pads themselves had 4 fire buttons, which was quite a lot in those days. Remember, it was competing against the Atari 2600 with only 1 fire button. And you had all these other functions, which basically mimics what you can do these days with modern controllers that have, 8, 10 buttons on them. This actually had more than that. So really an innovative controller, and worked well in a lot of games, allowed for a lot more complex games than the Atari 2600. Now, I played the hell out of my Intellivision for the first couple of years, but at some point it did start to look and feel a little outdated. Mattel in 1982 came out with the Intellivision 2, which was designed to look and feel a little more modern, and like I mentioned, it allowed them to sell it at a lower price. This Intellivision 2 here, you can see the controller's gone a little bit yellow. Of course, back in those days, everything had to use this fire retardant bromine, which that is the reaction that causes the yellowing. Oddly enough, on my system, only one controller has that problem, and the system itself does not, which suggests to me that probably this was replaced at some point, maybe with an even cheaper controller. They probably made them even more cheaply as time went on. That's my guess anyway. The system itself went from having a power switch to this combination power and reset button. There's various other things that they sort of streamlined. One improvement that they made, which I would actually recommend getting an Intellivision 2 just for this, is the controllers became detachable. Let's see if I can do this. It's not that easy, but here you go. That is the detachable controller, and it has sort of the same connector as other joysticks of the time. I'm sure the pinout's different, but same connector, so you can make your own cables if you want. But yeah, the controller otherwise stayed basically the same. It does have a little stiffer feel, and the number pad has gone kind of nasty. It no longer has any sort of tactile feedback at all. But again, with an overlay in there, you kind of lose the tactile feedback anyway, so it's kind of a wash. But it is nice to just have the detachable controllers, especially today, because you can fairly easily find these separately if you need to replace one. Again, I loved my Intellivision 2. I played this. This made it feel to me like an entirely new system again, and I played this probably for the next few years, at least up until 1985-86. Here I have my Intellivoice connected to my Intellivision 2. The Intellivoice only came styled like the Intellivision 1, but it would work with either system. Mattel did show some mock-ups of a restyled Intellivoice with some advertisements in the later years, but they never actually released that model. In fact, if you see those advertisements now, you should know that what they are showing in those advertisements is made of wood. It's not actually even a component. The Intellivoice was designed to provide synthesized voice to certain games. You had to buy specific Intellivoice games, but if you did, you were treated to some pretty complex vocalizations, and this was a big deal at the time. Not many other systems offered this. The Atari 2600 certainly didn't at the time, although I believe there were one or two very late Atari 2600 games that would give you maybe one or two words. But for the most part, you had to buy an actual computer to get any sort of voice, and even then, that was an advanced feature on computers. To have it on a home console was a pretty amazing thing. Now here's my personal collection of games. The Intellivision only had about 150 games total made for it, and so it's not impossible to collect them all, although some are quite rare, and of the ones that I have, you can probably see if you know anything about the Intellivision, I have pretty much all the common ones and nothing else. I just want to talk a little bit about some of these games and the cartridges themselves, and then I want to give you a little treat. I'm going to open a brand new, never opened game before live on camera. So let's take a look at some of these right now. Now let's say you're just getting into Intellivision for the first time and you want to know what to look for. Are there any particular games or anything else that you should look for? Well, I'll leave a list of my personal favorites down in the description. I'm not going to go through them all right now. You see what I have here. This is sort of the staple collection for any collector of Intellivision. You want to get probably a good selection of these games. These are all pretty good games. But I do want to talk a little bit again about the packaging. I prefer the early packaging for Intellivision, and I think most people do. So when you do buy games, look for the early packaging, if you can. And that's typified here by the plastic insert, of course the gatefold sleeve. The first thing to go under Mattel was that plastic insert. This is sort of how a lot of mid-period Mattel games were packaged. You see no plastic insert there, otherwise pretty much the same. Those are still okay. This is an Intellivision Inc. re-release of what was originally called NFL Football. Intellivision Inc. did not renew the licenses for NFL or MLBPA or anything like that, so just released as Football, and of course no gatefold sleeve anymore. In fact, you can't really open it from the top. You can't even get to the cartridge in there. So you actually have to open these from the bottom, which I find quite annoying. Intellivision Inc. games, white label you see there. That's kind of one way to know you're looking at an Intellivision Inc. game. And as far as the games themselves go, they're fine. They play exactly the same for the most part, and no reason to avoid them there. But what does happen with these is, let's see, you can see here, they do crush quite easily, and they don't stack well if you're into stacking. As you can see, everybody stacks their games. I mean, I know we shouldn't, but we do. So that's what happens with those. The Intellivoice had its own sort of variant of the packaging. No plastic insert, and a slightly different sort of instruction area over here. These boxes, though, seem to be made of slightly heavier cardboard. It's very rare to find these worn out. And then here we have one of the sort of later, after Mattel went away from the sort of block lettering for everything, they did try to get some arcade games, and they used the arcade logos whenever they could. This is also a Intellivision Inc. production. Kind of surprising that they did carry over some of the arcade logos, but they did, at least for a while. So, yeah. Now, some of my favorite packaging actually came from Magic, a third-party brand. All of their games came in these nice silver boxes. Plastic slide-out tray. Everything felt like really high quality. Even their sort of instruction manuals. I mean, full-color instruction manuals. Look at that. That is pretty amazing. And their overlays were made of this textured material. I don't know if you can see that on camera there, but it's kind of a little bit shiny, has a nice quality feel to it. And the cartridges themselves had sort of their own distinctive shape and more of the silver detail. I mean, Magic always positioned themselves as kind of a, I don't want to say higher end, but sort of a quality third-party developer. They didn't want people to see them as sort of a knockoff. And people didn't. We thought they were a great developer, and we all looked forward to their games, especially because their games were some of the best ever made for the system. I'm going to show you a little bit of gameplay from Microsurgeon in just a few minutes. But first, let's take a look at a brand new Intellivision game. I actually received this game for Christmas in, I believe, 1983. So this would be my second time opening this up brand new. This was a later Mattel release, and actually never came in a gatefold package, always came in this same box. So this should be the same exact experience that I had or anyone would have had back then. So let's rip it open right now, and I hope there are no technical problems with the camera, because I got one shot with this. Here we go. Here goes that shrink wrap. Oh, feel that. That is 30-year-old shrink wrap right there. By the way, you can buy these on eBay. They're not too expensive. There are still quite a few real new unsealed Mattel Intellivision games out there. So there it is. The box is open. By the way, a lot of Intellivision games didn't even come with shrink wrap. The later ones did, but many of them did not. So don't worry too much about that. But that is one of the reasons why I picked this one up, because it did come with shrink wrap. I distinctly remember that when I was a kid. So let's open it up. Oh, feel that. Not even bent yet. I just bent it, but there it is. Now it's bent. And there's the cartridge popping out. And a little shelfware there. But, yeah, a little shelfware, a little bit of dust, and a little bit of the label itself sort of popping off. That's not unexpected. And here you also have the shrink-wrapped instructions. Let's open that up, see if there's any nice little goodies, like any kind of catalog or anything that comes with this. There's your overlays. And this is how they came in later releases. Peel them apart. And yeah, look at that. Nice catalog along with it. Used to love these. Full color, look at that. What's this? 90-day limited warranty. Yeah, hopefully we won't have to take advantage of that. And these catalogs featured pretty much all the staple games. And if you happen to get one of these, just pretty much buy every game in here, because these are all really good. Maybe not Frog Bog, maybe not Triple Action, but the rest of these. Yeah, interesting that they're still advertising some of the sports licenses that they no longer had. So here is that copy of Burgertime that I just opened. This is a brand new copy of Burgertime. I'm playing this on my Intellivision 2 and shooting directly at my TV screen with my camera. So any kind of reflections or anything like that, please excuse me for that. Also excuse me if I happen to suck playing this game. It's been quite a while. I used to be pretty good at this, but who knows now. So just be gentle, don't laugh at me. But here we go. Let's turn the sound up. You can hear the theme song that you will never get out of your head as soon as this video is over. Come on, guys. Get on the bun. There you go. Ah! And that's one of the perils of the disc-based control. I actually was pressing down there, but you kind of roll your thumb around, and sometimes it doesn't quite register the way you want it to. At the time this was released in 1982, this was probably the best home version of this game that you could get. There was a pretty good IBM PC CGA version of this game as well. In fact, it was superior to this in all but sound. But it's kind of obscure now, but I'm sure you can find some YouTube videos of that around as well. In terms of home consoles, though, it really didn't get much better than this. Anyway, so yeah, that's that. This was about probably my favorite game of late 1982, 83. I'm not sure exactly which year I got this in, but that's the first game I want to show you. And here is Microsurgeon Bio Magic. This is one of my favorite games for the system, and actually the existence of games like this is one of the things that I love about the Intellivision. I mean, you play in this game as a little robot being controlled by a doctor somewhere inside this patient, killing these diseases and other things. I'm not doing too well here, actually, but I used to be really good at this game. Well, this patient's gonna die. As you can see there, I'm being attacked by white blood cells, and I don't know what I'm doing, but anyway, you get the idea. This is one of the more innovative games for this system, or really for any system. One of the problems here is I don't have the overlay on my controller, so I don't really know what I'm doing. There's something. That is one of the things about the Intellivision is you really do, at least at first, you need to have the overlays to know basically what you're doing in any game. After a while, you kind of get used to the game and you don't need the overlays anymore, but I haven't played this game in quite a while now, like pretty much all my Intellivision games, so yeah, I'm sure I'm not doing too well. Let's see. Well, his kidneys upgraded to fair. There were a lot of innovative games for the Intellivision like this one. I mean, you don't really see games like this too much anymore for any system. When you get down to it, it's basically kind of like a shooter, but you do need to stay inside the lines, which are the veins and arteries, and you need to use different weapons for the different diseases. I actually don't really know what I'm doing. I don't have the overlay, so I don't know how to select the different weapons, but that's just me being stupid. Ideally, you would want to clear out every single one of these things, and when you did that, your patient would be upgraded to good, and you would basically win. And collect. The game is basically, as any good doctor would tell you, the game is all about collecting the most money. Anyway, let's move on. Now here we have Space Battle. This was one of Mattel's early system sellers for the Intellivision. You see the copyright 1979 down there. This is your average sort of Battlestar Galactica ripoff, and that was intentional on the part of Mattel from what I've read. Let's just get into it here. And one of my earliest memories of this game actually was I was living in San Francisco at the time, and WPIX TV, actually KPIX, I'm forgetting, this was west of the Mississippi. KPIX TV ran sort of a children's program. They showed cartoons, that kind of thing, after schools around 3:30, 4 o'clock. They had a host who would take callers, and over the phone, they would play Space Battle. They never called it that, but they would show this on the screen, and as the sort of gun sight was moving around, the kids would have to call out, "Pix, pix, pix," to shoot. It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen, but it did kind of get me into the Intellivision. I believe this might have even been before I got the system, and it made me really want it. This game is actually quite intense. There's actually stuff going on in the background while you're doing this. The Cylons, or whatever they're actually called, are still attacking and moving closer to your base as you're getting in here, and you might at some point start hearing sort of alarms going off, and if you do, you better get out of that battle quick, either by winning it or just by leaving and hoping your AI can take over. And it is kind of a strategy game in that way also. I still really like this game. It's really easy to sort of pick up and play, but it's quite difficult to win, especially in this version of the game, which I believe this is the hard version. They made several different versions of this game. There was an easy and a hard version, and there may have been kind of a normal version as well. And I believe this is the hard one. But let's get back out here to Radar, see what's going on. I probably could win this, but let's move on. Now, I had wanted to show you some Intellivoice games. In fact, I had set it all up, tried all of my games out, but unfortunately, it seems like something's wrong with my Intellivoice. And I do remember that from when I was a kid as well. The Intellivoice is kind of a finicky machine and would sort of require a lot of jiggling around to get it to work right, even when it was basically new. I couldn't get mine to work right at all today, so unfortunately that's going to have to wait. Maybe I'll do another video in a little while and show you nothing but Intellivoice games. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Intellivision and its games. If you want to get into the system for yourself, of course, there's the various standard ways of doing so. eBay, that's where I picked up my current two systems. It's not very expensive to pick up an Intellivision there, or the games. The games are quite cheap by eBay standards. Of course, you can always get into the Intellivision Flashback, which comes with various games. Most of the system's staple games will be included with that. And then there's emulation for your PC or even your smartphone. This isn't going to be an exhaustive list, but a couple of the PC emulators to look at would be JZ INTV or Nostalgia. Those are the big ones that I've heard about a lot. And there's also a great version of JZ INTV for Android phones. It will even show the overlays along with the game you're playing if you have the right files. That said, I do recommend playing on the real hardware, mostly because of the controller. The controller is just very difficult to emulate, and you really need to have the feel of it in your hand as you're playing, along with the overlays in your hand as you're playing, as you saw earlier with me playing Microsurgeon. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll be doing more of these console videos pretty soon, so watch for those. Until then, see you later.